Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. As I've said before, or I guess bragged about before, I've played a lot of JRPGs. It's kind of my thing. But which JRPG is my favorite? Asking me to pick is a difficult task. Of course, you're not asking me to do that. I'm doing this to myself, so I really don't have anyone else to blame. But for this video, I'm not going to think about it in terms of my one favorite JRPG, because that's Chrono Trigger. Enough said. No, I'm going to look at it in terms of my favorite JRPG on each console I've ever owned. And that would make for a super long video, so I'm going to break it up into parts if that's cool. Part 1, this video right here, is going to cover all of my favorites on Nintendo consoles, but 2 caveats. 1, I'm covering handhelds in their own video, and 2, I'm considering the Switch a home console for the purposes of this video. Also, I don't remember exactly who I'm stealing this idea from, but whoever you are, thanks. I've mentioned before that my very first JRPG experience was Dragon Warrior on the NES. It's one of those magical moments as a little kid where suddenly, miraculously, there's just this new game in your house, and you have no idea how it got there or who bought it for you, but there it is. I think in this case, it was Nintendo themselves who got it for me. They sent out a ton of free copies to Nintendo Power subscribers for whatever reason. But in any case, here was this shiny new game. Now, a new game in general was cause for celebration. As a 7-year-old little dork, Nintendo was my life. 33 years later, and not much has changed. Still, there was something even more special about this new game. This was a JRPG. Of course, at that time, I had no idea what a JRPG was. I'm not even sure if the term was around back then. But Yuji Horí's first effort at replicating what he loved about Western RPGs laid the groundwork for an entire genre. The graphics are simple, even for an NES game. The dialogue is all in ye olde English because the localizers thought that would be cool, I guess. Listen, I love a good Ren Fair as much as the next nerd, but even I don't think Old English is a strong selling point for a game. The combat is simple, but for the time, it was fairly mind-blowing. Enemy sprites are colorful, some of them look deceptively happy as you stab them with your broadsword, and the combination of chunky sound effects and descriptive text made every battle feel so important. It was eye-opening for little Brandon. And that's why, even if it's not the best JRPG on the NES, Dragon Warrior is my favorite. It's Chrono Trigger. Enough said. Nah, I'm just kidding. I acknowledge that it is not, in fact, enough said. So I'll say some more. Chrono Trigger is the culmination of 16-bit JRPG development. It brings together the finest talents of the finest developers and crafts the finest experience as yet seen on a home console. You can make the argument that developers are still chasing the coattails of Chrono Trigger to this day. Even Square Enix seems afraid to touch it, lest they tarnish the legacy. We get a giant world to explore, full of towns, dungeons, monsters to fight, and then we get that world again and again and again throughout so many different periods of history, from the prehistoric era to the distant future. Time travel hadn't been done to this extent in role-playing games. Seeing your efforts in one time period affect the others is such a cool touch, and it makes the experience feel even bigger than it is. The story starts out as a fun sort of romp through time, but it evolves into something much deeper and with much more significant consequences. And the pacing is absolutely perfect. It's a brisk game too, probably only 20 or 25 hours. In a world of overly bloated games, and especially RPGs, a 20-hour game sounds like a tropical vacation to me. Oh, and don't even get me started on the aesthetics, the graphics, the music, man, the music. I'd loved JRPG music before, but Chrono Trigger's was the game soundtrack that made me into a true game music fan. Yasunori Mitsuda is a genius, and this is where he got his start. We wouldn't have the awesome soundtracks of games like the Xenoblade series today if Chrono Trigger hadn't happened. I'll stop talking about Chrono Trigger now because I have a lot of other games to cover, and honestly, I could talk about this game all day. Next. Did the N64 even have any JRPGs? Let me check my notes. Oh, right. I covered one in a video recently. Yeah, Quest 64. Quest 64 is not my favorite JRPG on the N64. Are there more? Oh, Aiden Chronicles the First Mage. That's a JRPG. I didn't play it. I'm not sure why I own it now, actually. So that's not my favorite either. I don't know, y'all. I'm stumped. Were there any good JRPGs on the N64? I guess Paper Mario's an RPG, but I'm pretty sure I only rented that and I didn't get very far. I guess my favorite JRPG on the N64 is Zelda Ocarina of Time. Look, I'm sorry, I know that's not a JRPG, but it's made in Japan, so that covers the J, and it's definitely a game, so there's the G. It's a JG. Let's roll with that. Ocarina of Time may have been one of my most anticipated games of all time. As a kid that got duped into buying the N64 because I assumed that's where all the JRPGs would be, I was excited for anything that had the whiff of fantasy adventure to it. The screenshots in magazines of early builds of this game still live rent-free in my mind to this day. This was going to be the biggest world in a video game ever. I mean, okay, I'm sure like some Elder Scrolls game had a bigger world than this, but I didn't know about those games, okay? My computer was only for doing homework. I think about hype now and how almost as often as not I end up disappointed by a game I'm excited for, at least in some way. Not so with Ocarina of Time. Whatever expectations I had as a 12 or 13-year-old, this met them and then some. The combat was revolutionary, with Z targeting essentially being the way all 3D action games have worked ever since. The story was somewhat more involved for a Zelda game at the time, with actual characters you could interact with and care about. And the big open world definitely left me in awe. The idea that a game like this could exist, it was as mind-blowing to me as Mario 64 was, and that in itself was a paradigm-shifting experience. Ocarina of Time is definitely keeping its spot as my favorite N64 game, period, JRPG or not. It's to my great shame that I was a late adopter of the Gamecube. I had felt pretty burned by Nintendo after the N64 left me essentially JRPG-less for several years, and now I had the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2 to give me all the JRPGs I needed. And even though the Gamecube fared better than the N64 in terms of genre representation, it's still pretty light on the JRPGs. You've got the two Baten Kaitos games, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door, Skies of Arcadia Legends, some really excellent games. But my favorite one right now is Tales of Symphonia. Here's the game that brought the Tales of franchise into the third dimension. Its cel-shaded characters actually do a lot to keep this game looking pretty solid even today. Its story was long and twisting and full of awesome characters, and its battle system, man, the Tales of games are such a blast to play, and Tales of Symphonia established the first iteration of the series' 3D battle system. The action is constant from the moment a battle begins. You're apparently even able to do 4-player co-op in the battles, which would have been great, except I don't have 3 friends. Who do I look like? A cool guy with friends? Learning how to time your attacks, when to launch one of your variety of special moves, when to fall back, it takes a while to master a Tales of game, and Symphonia is no exception. Not that it's overly difficult, it actually feels pretty well balanced for newcomers, and there are some difficulty options that help there too. In terms of graphics and gameplay, Tales of Symphonia is some of the best the GameCube had to offer, and it's no small wonder that people are still talking about this game today. It just had a remaster on modern platforms, and while I know it has some issues, it's still a great option if you're looking for an easy way to play this masterpiece today. If I felt shame at getting to the GameCube late, then the Wii represents me in my darkest gaming hour. Even though I bought a Wii on day one in North America, I didn't use it a ton. I was becoming, it hurts to say it, a casual. It's true, I still aspired to be a gamer like I'd always been, but for some reason, other things were pulling me away from games. Suffice to say, I don't have a ton of super great gaming memories from the Wii period, but there's one standout I can talk about, and that's The Last Story. The Last Story was from famed Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. He found himself forced out of Square after his film, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, financially destroyed the company. Which, I mean, I guess that's fair. But it's not like Square wasn't also behind the movie, so really, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. Anyway, that's not the most important thing here. What is important is that Sakaguchi went off and formed his own development studio, Mistwalker, and they produced The Last Story for the Nintendo Wii. Sakaguchi took on the directing role, and perhaps just as notably, Nobuo Uematsu, the composer for the Final Fantasy series up until Final Fantasy X, took on composition duties. This was enough to get even non-gamer me pretty excited. Now, it was a departure for me in the sense that it was an action RPG, which I was slightly less excited about, But fortunately, it didn't force you to use Wiimote Waggle or anything like that. You could totally just use a Pro Controller and enjoy it like any other JRPG. The caveat to this entry is that even though I'm listing it as my favorite JRPG on the Wii, I never actually finished it. The gaming on Wii I was feeling at that time was very powerful. But I've repurchased it, and I will definitely be making my way through this one again very soon. We'll see if it holds up. Those of you who have seen my channel before were probably wondering why my favorite Wii JRPG wasn't Xenoblade Chronicles. That's simply because I never played it on the Wii. But I have played its sort of sequel, sort of spin-off, Xenoblade Chronicles X. When this game came out, I was actually anti-hyped for it. It sounded like some generic sci-fi garbage, if I'm being honest. And since I hadn't yet played the original Xenoblade Chronicles, I was starting to get the impression that series creator Tetsuya Takahashi was losing his touch. I love Xenogears and the Xenosaga trilogy. His new games just weren't grabbing my attention. But then I played Xenoblade X, and man, talk about a reversal of opinion. Xenoblade Chronicles X is hiding in plain sight the most incredible open world I've ever seen in a video game. Period. It's astonishing to me that this thing was running on a Wii U. In fact, I was playing this around the time the PS5 came out, and at least at that point, it was still one of the most amazing looking games I'd ever seen. The part that took a bit more time to grow on me was the story. The first issue is that, for the first and only time in a Xeno game, you're controlling a silent protagonist. That sucks a lot of the life out of a JRPG story for me. But the mysteries in this game's plot are so incredibly intriguing that it's frankly a crime there hasn't been a sequel in all these years. The cliffhanger ending alone is the sort of thing that'll keep you up at night, wondering. Combat is pretty standard Xenoblade, not a ton changed from the original Xenoblade Chronicles, but for whatever reason, I gelled with this one better than I did in the first game. The music is catchy, but kinda corny. Like, the songs have lyrics, and the lyrics are in English, and I'm begging Japanese composers to stop doing that, or like, record the lyrics in English for the Japanese audience and in some other language for us, because it's hard to focus on the combat when I'm rolling my eyes at the cheesy lyrics to your song. But that's an extremely minor criticism, and I can't act like I wasn't singing those songs around the house for a month after I finished it either. It's just an all-around amazing experience, and the fact that it's still trapped on the Wii U is just incredibly sad. This is probably going to be controversial. The Switch is home to a metric ton of JRPGs and even a bunch of excellent exclusives. The entire Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy is on the Switch, for crying out loud. Bravely Default 2, both Octopath Travelers, Fire Emblem, Trails, the list goes on and on. But I'm gonna trumpet the glories of my favorite Switch game from now until Square makes another one of these, and I hope you won't be too mad at me for it. My favorite JRPG on the Switch is, of course, Harvestella. Now, if you know me or if you've watched enough of my channel, this probably isn't a shock. I talk about Harvestella every chance I get. This game came out of nowhere for me, starting out as a trailer in a Nintendo Direct that I barely paid attention to, and growing into just one of the most epic experiences I've ever had playing a game. The thing that first caught my attention after the trailer definitely did not was the composer. Someone mentioned on Twitter that the music was by Go Shiina. Now, I had to look again. Go Shiina? The legendary composer of Tales of Legendia, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time? Okay, I'm interested. Honestly, his presence on the staff was enough to get me to buy the game. I'm not kidding. I saw Go Shiina was the composer, and without learning anything more about the game, I picked it up. He's that good. Whatever expectations I had going into this, that it was just a Rune Factory ripoff, that farming sims were not all that fantastic anyway, that it was going to be some generic cash-in on the popularity of Stardew Valley, well, all of that fell away almost immediately. While it was clear that this game didn't have the biggest budget, what was also clear was that Square Enix spent its money wisely. The art design is immaculate, creating a dreamy world that's absolutely bursting with color and life. The music, like I suggested, is next level, some of Go Shiina's finest work yet, seriously. And what surprised me the most, I think, was the story. Obviously, I don't want to go into any spoilers, so I can't say much, but I'll say this. Harvestella is so much more than what it seems to be. This story definitely takes you on a journey. It's incredible. If you like JRPGs, action RPGs, good music, good stories, good games, you need to check out Harvestella. Grab it on Switch or get it on PC. I'm not picky. Just play it. Anyway, those are my favorite home console Nintendo JRPGs. Did any of my favorites match up with yours? Do you like completely different games and think my favorites are stupid and dumb? Let me know down in the comments. If you wouldn't mind liking the video, I'd be super grateful, and if you've made it this far and you're not already, would you consider subscribing? It helps out a ton. That's all for now, but I'm sure we'll come back to this series soon. Until next time, bye.